Hi, thank you for tuning into the Short Stacks. I'm Lisa Quintero, Young Adult Librarian.
And I am Nick Barron, patron and sometimes volunteer.
This is a show where we talk to you about what we've been reading, listening to, or watching. And this week we're actually going to be talking about things that remind us of the season of autumn.
Yes.
The first,
library news.
So things are going to be a little bit different this fall. As most of you know, every fall we have a Halloween happening. And unfortunately, because of COVID, we won't be able to do that this year. But we are doing some different things to celebrate Halloween with you. So starting October 26th, there will be an I Spy October scavenger hunt for children. So you can stop by the library and pick it up. And if you turn it in before Halloween or by Halloween and give us the passphrase, you can get a bag of treats. That you can either turn it in via curbside or you can turn it in person. We also will be having a virtual costume parade so that you get to see your friends and neighbors in their costumes. So send us your pictures, either post them on Facebook or email them to us at shorewood@mcfls.org. And we will post them on our social media channels. And we will also have a slideshow going here at the library so everybody can see their neighbors in costumes since we can't do it in person this year. We also just started a new display in the youth services department called 100 plus picture books every child should know. And so there's a list and a display if you're interested. And it's got all sorts of different classics and then also some newer stuff on there. So especially if you're working towards your 1,000 books before kindergarten, you should check that out. And then in terms of events, we've got Family Fun Night coming up on October 13th, which is next Tuesday. And you can just pick up a kit to do the activities at home. We also still have Art Cart Online happening where you pick up the kit here at the library, and that's going to be happening next Wednesday, October 14th. Our Stories on the Lawn are continuing on October 15th, and it sounds like Miss Heidi might be continuing them depending on the weather, but if it gets too chilly, she might stop them the 15th. So keep an eye on the calendar for that if you've been coming to story time, and make sure to register since we're trying to encourage social distancing. And she actually, because it's been so popular, has created 2 sessions. So there's a 9:30 a.m. session now and a 10:30 a.m. session. And then finally, there will be actually not finally, 2 more things. There's going to be a Teen Take and Make also on October 15th, which will be a fall-themed craft for all you teens. And then finally, on October 24th, we will have a virtual program called Talking About Race, Understanding Racial Identity Development, which will be a online program hosted by the library and the school district, and it's actually going to be on Zoom. You can find the information on how to access it at shorewoodlibrary.org. It's going to be a professor from UWM, Dr. Erin Winkler. She is an associate professor of African and African diaspora studies at the University of Wisconsin, and she'll be talking about how adults can help children and youth understand and navigate their racial identity development processes. So if you're interested in that, check it out. All right, so let's go on.
I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
So what are some of the Family Fun Night activities? Do you know?
I don't know what this week's are. They change every time. I think the last time Miss Heidi had like some sort of boat that you built at home. And the art cart kits have been really cool lately. So Miss Susan this week had people make a giant spider. So there was like a hanger so you could hang it from your door, and she had a piece of paper that you would cut out that was a giant spider, and then there was like a paper bag that you attached it to, and so it's like a Halloween decoration that you could color and hang on your door or in your house or wherever you wanted to hang it. So yeah, it's there've been a lot of really cool things happening in the kits, so make sure you check them out. I know things have slowed down a little bit since the summer, and I'm sure everybody's busy with school, but I know as it gets colder out here and gets rainy and gloomy in the fall, it's nice to have some stuff to work on at home sometimes.
Yeah, I'm a fan of activities. That's why I asked.
All right. Well, thank you for asking.
So, yeah.
From the stacks?
From the stacks.
All right. From the stacks. So yeah, like I said, this week we're going to be talking about things that remind us of fall or autumn. So we've got some things to watch, some things to listen to, and some things to potentially read. So Nick, what do you think of in terms of? Let's start with books. In terms of books, what do you think of when you think autumn?
So the first book that came to mind was immediately The Rules of Attraction by Bret Easton Ellis.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because it starts like a lot of books relating to people in school, in this case in college, and it's it starts with the beginning of the fall semester,
Mhm.
and so it's got that very like New England in fall type of vibe. Even though I don't even know if it takes place in New England, but it's just got that vibe.
Okay.
And yeah, it's, for me, it's one of those, like, it's a miserable book.
I mean, which
and at
Bret Easton Ellis book isn't a miserable book?
exactly, but at a point in my life, I absolutely loved that sort of thing, and
Uh-huh.
so that was like immediately the first thing that came to mind, because like I think of autumn and falling leaves and people going to their first college parties and all of that sort of thing, because
Uh-huh.
that's what it documents.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think I when I first read the book in my 20s, I absolutely loved it.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's definitely for people that don't mind a little bit of darkness and misery. So yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
but yeah, you give me a book.
All right. I'll actually give you an author.
Okay.
So when I think of autumn, I also think, about leaves falling, and I think about a lot of Gothic literature because it's like, they're always like it's always stuff happening on the moors and there's, rain and it's dark and it gets dark early and just kind of, you know, cold and
Mm,
autumn evokes that sort of imagery in my mind, and it also evokes the whole, like, back to school imagery, so, um but the books that I tend to think of tend to be, like, Gothic. So, the first author that I, automatically associate with autumn is Edgar Allan Poe,
mm,
and I was really into Edgar Allan Poe when I was a kid, like, when I was in high school, and I think one of my favorite stories is The Cask of Amontillado, and I also really enjoyed his poetry, like the poem Alone, um, and they just kind of have this very creepy, Halloweeny, it's October, everything's miserable kind of feel to them. Not that everything's miserable in October,
yeah.
I enjoy fall now, but, like, you know, I don't know, 16-year-old Lisa was like, "This is great. Life is miserable. This embodies life."
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you're looking for dark and gloomy and gothic, check out some Edgar Allan Poe. I know he has some collections of his stories here, and a lot of his stuff has been adapted to, different mediums. I know that there's, like, audiobooks of his stuff. There's some film versions of his stuff, like The Pit and the Pendulum and things like that. So, yeah. I guess another author too that evokes that same kind of feeling for me is Agatha Christie. So if you're into mysteries, because Edgar Allan Poe tends to be more like creepy stuff than mystery, but if you're into mysteries, Agatha Christie uh, really captures, I think, too, also that fall gothic, we're in
Mm,
England kind of element.
yeah. So relating to when you mentioned Poe and old timey authors, so you remember this experience a few autumns ago. I decided, I was like, I really want to read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving,
Ah, yes.
and I was, the book is in the children's department,
Uh-huh.
and I was astounded at how difficult the language was. And when I
Uh-huh.
mean difficult, it just like they wrote in such a different way.
Yeah.
Um, it was written in what, the 1800s.
Yeah, something like
Uh,
that, yeah.
yeah, and it's written in such a more convoluted style
Uh-huh.
that I remember I only got like 15 pages into it. I'm like, I'm done. And I was like, the story is so ultimately like of the season.
Yeah.
And here I was reading this children's book, and I was like, man, I don't know that I have got the persistence to push through this.
Yeah, it was written in 1820. I don't know that I've ever read it. I know the story just because of watching, the Disney Ichabod Crane,
Yep.
Headless Horseman cartoon. But but beyond that, like, yeah, I'll have to check it out sometime and see what I think about it. But
yeah, it was eye-opening and a slog at the same time.
it's also interesting because like those books weren't written necessarily for children. It's just interesting that it's in the children's department.
Yeah,
I know like certain books end up in the children's department. They weren't necessarily written before children because it was like before children's literature was really a thing.
yeah.
But yeah,
It's like putting the Canterbury Tales in the
in the
children's
children's department,
department, written
which I'm sure
in
we probably have like some children's version of that, or a library has a children's version of that somewhere because it's a classic, and so a lot of
yeah,
times classics are changed over into children's books, which isn't, it's not bad or anything.
yeah.
It's just interesting, especially because if you're struggling as an adult, like, would a kid find interest in it? They might. I mean, I'm sure there probably are kids. I know I read some stuff like when I was younger, but I know a lot of it went way over my head. I remember reading Dante's Inferno when I was in high school, and that went like way over my head.
Yeah.
But yeah, a children's book that is a more modern book that makes me think of fall is The Mysterious Howling, and it's part of the I think the series is called like The Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place, and the book is by Mary Rose Wood, and it's a book for like middle graders. And it is the story of a nanny in England who gets hired by a family to civilize these 3 children who have been raised by wolves. And so they all like howl and like scratch at the furniture and all these things. And, it's 1800s England. And so she has to teach them how to be like, gentlemen and ladies. And they just want to run around and act like puppy dogs, basically.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cute. And it's like I said, it's a series that we have here. So you should, if you're looking for something fun and cute that is, a little gothic but not super dark, that one's a good one. So another one that reminds me of fall is Paper Girls, which is a graphic novel collection by Brian K. Vaughan and Chris. Is it Chris Chang? No, Cliff Chang. He's the artist, and so Brian K. Vaughan, some people may know because he did Saga and he did Why the Last Man Standing, and Paper Girls is a story about a bunch of girls in the 80s, and it is reminiscent of fall because, like I said, fall makes me think of back to school, and so it all starts out on Halloween in like 1988, I think, and it's basically about these girls who are a bunch of paper girls, and they witness this strange thing happen, and it's basically a time traveler from the future has come to 1988 to try to stop something from happening in the future, and they get sucked into this whole like time traveling story where they end up like traveling to the future and to the past and back to like 1980 something, and they like meet themselves at different points along their lives, and it's very cool. It really has that fall feel because they're like and that like retro feel because they're all on their bikes and they're all wearing like Letterman jackets or jean jackets because it's fall, and the clothing and the art and the ambiance in the graphic novel really conveys that sort of feeling. And then the last book that I had on my list, or actually as an author, was Gail Carriger. And Gail Carriger's written 2 different series. She's written a series for young adults, and she's written a series for adults. And the series for adults is called The Parasol Protectorate, and the series for young adults is called the Finishing School series. And both of them are like these steampunk series that also incorporate werewolves and vampires, and they're very fun adventures that are pretty funny, and like they have really strong female characters, and they are these young ladies in like Victorian England, and they have to fight off like vampires and werewolves, but they have to do it while still being ladies and maintaining their composure. And so there's like it's funny because it incorporates a lot of the like culture and high society things of England of the time, along with like your parasol being a sword and having like a gun in it that shoots like silver bullets and things like that, and finding ways to hide weapons in like your corset and things like that. And the adult one has like a little bit more of a romance element to it too, if you're into that. And the young adult one has a little bit of that, but not as much. The young adult one's more about like a girl just coming into her own by going to finishing school, and her parents not really knowing what kind of finishing school she's going to. Like they sent her to finishing school because she's like this like brash young girl, and they need to make her into a proper lady, and they end up sending her to finishing school, but they don't realize that the finishing school that has come to recruit her is actually like training her to be a spy. And so yeah, they're pretty fun if you're looking for something fun. And like I said, that's Gail Carriger, the Parasol Protectorate, and the finishing schools.
I did have one last one to add, and this one is going to be different than all of the others because of the fact that it is a piece of nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a biography that came out a few years ago called Empire of Imagination that is about Gary Gygax, the man who co-created Dungeons and Dragons. And the book, there's two reasons why I feel like it gives me like this feeling of fall. One is the fact that I spent, I guess, endless hours in my youth poring over D&D books, D&D manuals as a young lad, and also the fact that the book opens up with a very lengthy, like, walk through the day that Gary Gygax got ousted from his company TSR, which was based out of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin.
Okay. Yeah.
And so it goes through him walking through his walking through Lake Geneva during that October day when he was ousted from TSR. And so I, even though it's not like a lighthearted romp, though it's a fascinating book. If you have any interest at all in Dungeons and Dragons and the history of Dungeons and Dragons, it's well worth a read, even though it is definitely one-sided because there was a co-creator, Dave Arneson, who doesn't get the same credit as Gary Gygax does. But at the same time, it is, at least for somebody who's like me, who's loved Dungeons and Dragons for most of his life, it was a fascinating read, and it does make me think of October, and it's a good season to read that book. Highly recommend it.
All right, so let's move on to TV or movies. So one thing that I like to note before we go on is that we both love horror movies, and every October we watch a bunch of horror movies. And so on this episode, I'm not going to talk about horror movies because we're going to save those for our next episode. So all the TV shows that I'm talking about are not horror this time. But if you like horror, tune into the next episode, and we will be talking about horror movies. What are some TV shows or movies that make you think of fall, Nick?
So the first one that had come to my mind when I was making my list is actually kind of an obscure one. So the X-Files creator, Chris Carter, in the height of his popularity, he pitched another show called Millennium
I remember
about the Millennium Group. And I don't know if it's just because of like the sort of noirish conspiracy vibe that runs through the show, or if it's just because I vividly remember an episode that takes place on Halloween and the main character carving a pumpkin. But that was the first one that came to mind.
Okay.
What was your first one?
I think the first one that came to mind for me was actually the X-Files that you mentioned. It's like that was something I started watching when it first came out. I think I was 11, and I remember, it starting in the fall, and I remember watching it every Friday night, and it just had that creepy Halloween-y kind of feel to it because it's all stories of paranormal activity and things like that. And because it started in the fall, and because it's something that I associate with, an activity that I did in the fall as a child, like even though it was on year round, I'm the TV shows go off for the summer, they end the season, usually around like May or something like that, and then they're on hiatus for the summer while they're making the new season. And so every fall I would look forward to the new season of the X-Files, and I just really enjoyed, the atmosphere, and because it takes place in the Pacific Northwest, and there's so many trees and there's so many, it takes place all over the place, but it was filmed in the Pacific Northwest for the first few seasons, and because of that, it just has this very, autumnal vibe to me. I think, all the trees, all the forests, and for some reason forests evoke an imagery of autumn and fall for me. Um, and then another one that's in a similar vein that also is one that's supposed to take place in the Pacific Northwest is Twin Peaks. And that, has the whole like noir vibe to it. And then also like this like small town in the woods. And I remember, it follows the story of a girl who like gets killed and her friends at school and kind of what's going on in the town. And so that one also kind of has a autumn vibe for me.
Yeah, it's funny because we're like a one-trick pony, because the other thing that I had on my list also has a noirish vibe, and it's the more recent show Riverdale.
Okay.
And it's got that back to school type feel to it. At the same time, the stories and plot lines are all very kind of noirish. There's always a mystery to be solved, and so yeah,
femme fatales.
Yeah, yes, but I'm
going to Veronica.
Yes. Jughead's my favorite.
Yeah, Jughead's great.
I was telling that to the audience, not to you.
Okay, fine.
But we haven't kept up on the recent seasons, but I remember the first season being really into it.
Yeah. And another one that I can think of that kind of has more of the high school vibe for me that I really enjoy is Stranger Things.
Yes.
And that one, we haven't watched the third season yet, but we watched the first 2 seasons, and that one also evokes those feelings of back to school, and it's dark, but not so much noir. It's more, if you're into D&D or role playing games and things like that, it covers a lot of that kind of stuff. And then there's a whole storyline involving the younger kids who are in, what is it, like 7th grade, and then there's a storyline involving the one kid's older sister, and she's in high school. And again, the clothing and everything, the wearing of long sleeve shirts and sweaters and things like that makes me think of autumn.
And I'm going to share 2 quick stories about the X-Files.
Okay.
Relating to, because X-Files is on my list, so I'm going to take a little X-Files time.
All right.
When you were mentioning, where it was filmed, one of my favorite things, and I remember telling you this story before, is that there's an episode where they are pursuing something in Buffalo, New York, which is where I am from. Uh-huh. And they go to the Chinatown in Buffalo, New York, and there is no Chinatown in Buffalo, New York.
And you were like, excuse me, guys, do your research better.
Exactly. They also like go and visit somebody in the village of Kenmore, and like the shot, you're just like, this doesn't look like Kenmore at all. but anyways, the other relating to that sense of warmth and coziness and that huddling in front of the TV that kind of happens starting in the fall. One of my favorite stories about watching the X-Files is I was an avid X-Files fan for years. Mm-hmm. And when it moved from Fridays to Sundays, I think it was, my parents, here I'm the teenager, surly teenager, and with my thrash mullet and my corrosion of conformity T-shirt, and I'm sitting on the couch watching the X-Files, and my dad would walk over, and he never likes anything like sci-fi or in that vein.
Yeah.
And he would come over and he would watch from the first from the kitchen, then he'd work his way into the living room, and then before you know it, after like 3 episodes of him doing this over the course of weeks, he makes that migration, and then before you know it, he's on the floor, on the carpet, blanket over him and watching. And then my mom followed suit, and it became this family activity, all of us watching the X-Files. And I think it was because of the Mulder and Scully dynamic, but I don't know. But it was very like when I think of the X-Files, I think of that like cozy, warm family time.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's funny because that was one of the few shows that like my dad would watch with us if he was home.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was something that I started watching by myself, and then pretty soon, yeah, the whole family was watching too because they were just like, "What is this show? What is happening?
Yeah.
Aliens?"
Exactly.
You know, because we all just want to believe. And then the last one that I have on my list is actually called The Fall, and I don't remember if we've talked about it before on this show or not, but, it is a
Is that the
show
Gillian
that's
Anderson?
yeah, it's a Gillian Anderson
Yeah.
show, and it's a more recent show. It's only about 3 seasons long, and I started watching it, last year or the year before during the fall,
Mhm.
and, um it takes place in England, and it's the story of a detective who's played by Gillian Anderson and a serial killer played by Jamie Dornan, and she is trying to, solve these murders. And Jamie Dornan's character is very interesting because he is a psychiatrist, a grief counselor, who, is also a serial killer. And he's married and he has kids, and it's weird because, like, I've never seen that portrayal of a serial killer before. You usually see like Dexter or like,
Mhm.
these shows where they're like antisocial and don't have, friends or loved ones.
Dexter had very dynamic relationships.
Yeah, Dexter did have dynamic relationships, but Dexter also like Dexter was different than this show. This
Yeah, I
show's
know.
like darker. Like this show's darker. This show also it's interesting because it kind of puts some of the tropes about like women on their head, and Gillian Anderson's character is really interesting too, in the way that she plays her. She's a very strong person, and yeah, I highly recommend it if you like mysteries. It's a good show.
Yeah.
And it's only 3 seasons, so you don't have to, like, commit a lot of time to it.
Yeah. So
So music.
yeah, so music. So I have a bunch on my list. You want to start?
So there's 2 CDs that I have that I own, that the library also happens to own, that I always play in the fall in my car. And one of them is Dillinger Four's Civil War, and it has this song Gainesville on it. And I absolutely love that song. The chorus of that song is "It feels like summer in October," and I
Yeah.
love it when it feels like summer in October because there's always those days in the Midwest, at least. And Dillinger Four is a band from Minneapolis, so they understand Midwestern weather.
Yeah.
And so it's there's always those days in October where it's been like 60 degrees for a while, and then all of a sudden it's like 80 degrees. Like today, actually, today is a day like that where it's like supposed to be sunny out. It's going to hit 80. But this week's been real chilly, and it's we finally turned our heat on this week because it was so cold. But we have those rare days, and I love those days when it's warm outside, but the leaves are all colorful, and you can like just go out and enjoy and wander around and like ride your bike or do things, and just kind of remind yourself of winter's coming, so you got to enjoy the outdoors while you still can,
Mhm.
because once winter hits, most of us kind of cocoon up in our homes and don't do much outside. And so it just that song just is like screams fall to me. And the rest of the album is really good too.
Mhm.
So if you are into pop punk rock, check out Dillinger for Civil War.
And on
And
my,
on the other,
I
oh,
was
go
just
ahead.
gonna say, on my original version of my list, I've expanded my list since then. But Dillinger Four also has a fantastic record called Midwestern Songs of the Americas, and
Yeah,
it
it's good
also
too.
has that feel, and it is fantastic. Track it down
Yeah.
somewhere. All right.
And then the other one that I had on my list was the Get Up Kids on a Wire, and they're another like indie rock pop punk band. And that one, for some reason, the song Campfire Kansas on that album always makes me think of fall because like the imagery evoked is a bunch of friends camping, but it's like the water's cold, and like it's it could be a song that takes place in spring, but for some reason I've always listened to that album because of some of the other songs on it that kind of feel fallish to me.
Mhm.
I've always listened to that album in the fall, and I don't remember if it came out in the fall or what, but like, yeah, it's got a song called "Overdue" on it that's really good. That also kind of reminds me of fall, um, and so the also the melodies are a little bit like because like I feel when I think of like spring melodies, I think of like more upbeat stuff, whereas
Mhm.
the melody for Campfire Kansas is a little bit, like, sadder, I guess.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more, like, nostalgic and, like, them kind of missing certain things and it's kind of sung in past tense, and so that's one that I always listen to in the fall.
Very
All
good.
right, how about you?
I got a list.
You've got a list.
I was just looking in County Cat, and when I was making my list originally, the first record that came to mind was the record "Star" by the band Belly.
Okay.
Tanya Donnelly has a very ethereal voice, and just the nature of there's like this like kind of like darkly whimsical element to their sound. And that record, like I immediately, part of it's I got it for my birthday the year that it came out, but it
And your birthday's in October for those people who don't know.
Yeah, there you go. And so I have really strong associations with that record and the fall. Beastie Boys, Check Your Head. That record, it's got a very I'm pretty sure it came out the end of summer that year. I remember seeing the video for was it Past the Mic? I think it was Past the Mic, and it came like the video debuted, I think, right around the same time that like Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit did, and so like it was one of those. Hey, we're all going starting the next year of school. We're at our friend's house. We just had band practice. TV's on, and this video from Check Your Head is playing. But the record itself, it's got this like this arc to the flow, and it starts off. It's got a very like kind of darker but warm tones, and by the end of the record, it goes into this like full on kind of like introspective. And when I think of fall, I have a strong leanings towards like introspection.
Yeah, I do too. I think of nostalgia and introspection and just kind of like I said, reminding yourself of it's like a time of kind of taking stock of what you've done for the year and what you plan on accomplishing for the rest of the year and what you plan on accomplishing the next year that you didn't get accomplished in the current year.
Yep. So also tying into noir that we were talking about earlier, along with autumnal feels. Right now, I am on a huge trip hop kick, and so I've been listening to a lot of Tricky, Massive Attack, and Portishead particularly. Another woman with it's got a very ethereal and smoky quality, it's just. It's like the soundtrack to a modern noir film. It's fantastic. But now I'm going to go into a little bit of punk and metal. The record that I listen to every single year in October is Merciful Fate, Don't Break the Oath. It is got your full on, like, people in forests doing bad things. It's it is.
Are they wearing makeup? Do they have knives?
No. Well, so King.
Or is that just black metal?
That's well. This is pre-black metal. So black metal, kind of like took roots from things like Kiss and Merciful Fate. Merciful Fate. King Diamond was like one of the first people to wear corpse paint, and he was basically kind of taking the styles from Kiss.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he wore his white and black makeup in a Kiss type style, but of course with upside down cross and black metal type stuff.
Yeah.
But he also sang into a microphone stand that was made of human bones. And so yeah, as young Nick Barron, who discovered Merciful Fate in 7th grade. And bought this record, like it was just like, oh, my head's exploding. This is so dark and fantastic. And here it is. That was what, 25 years ago, 30 years. Mm-hmm. How old am I? 30 years ago. But it's still a record that like I think of immediately when I think of Halloween in October and
Uh-huh.
the changing of the seasons, and that gets listened to every single October.
Mhm.
In that vein, the one that people expect from an older punk rock fellow is to listen to Misfits.
Mhm.
Legacy of Brutality is available through County Cat, along with Merciful Fate, Don't Break the Oath. But Misfits, I mean, Legacy of Brutality, it's got the song Halloween on it. You can't go wrong.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember when you and I first started dating, like, you putting that record on a lot, and I
Yeah.
had never really listened to the Misfits all that much, and, yeah, that record makes me think of fall as well.
Yep. Yeah, I listened to that because you can't stand King Diamond's voice. But, so I had to listen to Merciful Fate in solitude. But yeah, and if you don't like the gritty, grainy recordings of the Misfits, you can always put on the first two Danzig records, which are also available through County Cat. But everything Glenn Danzig related is going to have that autumnal type feel. But Misfits, I go with the classic Misfits.
All right.
And I think that covers everything on my list, and one thing that was not on my list. And there was one that I was going to add, but I've talked too much. I love
All
music.
Right. I just thought of one more,
Okay.
and I'm just gonna go with it, and then we can wrap up. The other one that makes me think of fall a lot, and I don't know why I listen to this in fall again, is Common's B. And so I remember, as soon as September hit, I pulled that album out and put it in my car and started listening to it on repeat over and over again because I just it's kind of like a hopeful, but also like some of the songs, um, also evoke some of that introspective kind of feel and kind of thinking about where we are versus where we want to be. So yeah.
Very good.
All right. So last week or 2 weeks ago we talked about running, and we asked our listeners if there were any songs that they knew of that were about running that were not about love, but were actually just about running or runners. And we actually received some responses. So Nick's going to share what those were with you.
Okay, so the first one that I've got is Long Distance Runner, not surprising,
Okay.
by a hip hop artist who goes by Promo, Promoe. Don't know if that's available through County Cat. I didn't look. It's definitely
probably find it on YouTube or something.
Yeah, it's definitely a metaphorical take on running. He's talking about conquering drugs and getting fit and what have you. And
okay,
definitely like with hip hop, you've got a lot of lyrics. So I couldn't imagine you writing a song about running without getting metaphorical.
Yeah.
And the other one that people threw out there was Sonata Arctica. That's the name of the artist or the band, Sonata Arctica. Half a Marathon Man. I didn't listen to the lyrics. I got bombarded with like power metal in the faith warning Halloween with an type vibe, and I was like, I'm not ready for this right now. And young 16-year-old me would have been like, yeah, this Sonata Arctica is great. But it was a little much for me at this exact moment. But I appreciate Bobby and Kurt, the two people that responded for their engagement. Thank you.
Yeah. And if you have any TV shows, music, movies, books, authors that remind you of autumn or the season or the fall season, you should let us know. You can email us at shorewoodstacks@gmail.com, or you can share with us. We usually post our podcast to the library Facebook, so you can comment on the podcast post there if you like. Otherwise, you can also find us on Twitter at the Shorewood Library Twitter. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Do you have anything else you wanted to share?
I remembered the name of the band that I was going to add, and I was just looking to see if there's any audio CDs. No. Yeah,
What was the
I
band?
was gonna throw out Murder City Devils.
Oh, yes, Murder City Devils are very, very autumnal. There are a few bands that I could think of that are very autumnal that we don't own any of their stuff in County Cat because they're too, like, obscure, in terms of, they're not part of the big record industry, they're all on independent labels,
Okay.
and so, so I tried to find stuff that we have here in County Cat, and everything that I shared is stuff that's available
I
on, through the library
I
system.
was absolutely shocked that Merciful Fate Don't Break the Oath was available through County Cat. Thank you, Cudahy Library. You're doing something right.
Yeah, they also were the ones who had Dillinger 4 Civil War, and I was like, again, thank you, Cudahy Library. Tune in next time to hear about horror movies that we've been watching and some of our favorites as well. We hope you have enjoyed the show. You can find us on Podbean, Spotify, or iTunes. And as always, thank you for listening and be well. The Shorewood Stacks is produced by Lisa Quintero and Nick Barron for the Shorewood Public Library. Music for the show was created by Kevin MacLeod. The song is titled Ice Flow and can be found at incompetech.com.